Alright guys, this one I just had to record for YouTube because it was too long in the other one. So with this one I'm just going to give a quick summary. So exactly what is origination and direct costs. So direct costs, you guys already know that those are the costs that are directly involved or influenced by the production of your book. Now the olden days, the stuff that I scratched out, that was data capturing, disk cleanup, positives, cover positives, archiving, cover makeup. Those things we don't do these days anymore due to all the technological advances and processes and streamlining of processes. So that's not necessary anymore. But just to give you an idea, data capturing would be when, say for example, you have a lot of statistics that you need to get someone to type or to import or to work on, or there maybe there's a lot of numbers involved, like the statistics on farm murders or something like that, or your author couldn't type and you had to retype things. So data capturing is exactly what it says, but it's not really something we'd use anymore these days because everyone has access to a computer, or there's some ways or means of getting your manuscript in an electronic format. This cleanup used to be when your authors would hand you a CD and a CD-ROM, and we would then have to clean up that manuscript with ASCII codes and things like that that was embedded in the Word file. We don't do positives anymore because you know how the printing presses have changed over the years, so those are really outdated. Archiving, we're doing it electronically now, and you cover makeup and cover positives as well. So basically your cover design and cover artwork is all that we really still need at this stage. And then obviously your cover proofs that they will print, you will get this as a proof from your printing house as well to show you what the colors would look like, because it's usually a difference between what you see on screen and how it's actually displayed. So for origination and direct costs is the editing. Editing is usually worked out based on LAMP rates or your standard market-related prices. Usually editing is priced per word. So they would, for example, charge you 15 or 20 cents per word. It doesn't sound like a lot, but if you come to manuscripts that are like 80 to 100,000 words, it adds up. So editing is, you guys know what editing is, copy editing and editing. But yeah, so it depends on how big the editing, or is it a micro, or what kind of editing, substantive editing it is. So that is usually worked out per word. Sometimes you do get people that also charges per page. All right. So sometimes you do get your editors in-house that they do the editing themselves, but a lot of the times you have editorial coordinators that coordinate the process, and then the editing is done by people, it's outsourced. All right, so that's why there are costs involved. Proofreading, now that actually happens after typesetting. So what happens is, first, as you guys can remember, you're editing the manuscript. Once it's now ready and the commissioning editor is happy, they edited it for textual and spelling and all those kinds of things. There are also author queries. If they're not sure about something, it goes back to the author answers, bring their own, add their own corrections until you with a clean, if I can call it a clean manuscript, that then you then hand over to the typesetters. This manuscript will then obviously be laid out, typeset, and then you get your first proofs, and these proofs will then be proofread. Alright, so proofreading is only after that. So that's once all the mistakes and things have been corrected, the proofreader comes and give it a go again. Sometimes once or twice, and they can sometimes still find errors and mistakes, and then they have to correct it. A proofreader would also read for technical issues, like if words get cut off, or there's an orphan or a widow sentence at the bottom, or something doesn't display correctly, because remember, now you're taking it from, say for example, a Word file or a PDF file, and you're working it into InDesign, etc., etc. So there may stuff can happen, so you need to check it. That's what proofreading usually does. And proofreading, once again, is charged either per word or per page. So all right, you need to really know. Usually your editing is more expensive than the proofreading, because the proofreading should be comparison between the previous version and the new version, and for technical things, whereas editing is the big edit in the beginning. That's why it's also the price is higher. If you're going to think of If you're going to consider translations, then you need to work that in as well. There are translators' fees and there's translation fees, for example, non-fiction and fiction. But as I said, I'll see if that document is on ClickUp called LAMP Rate Guides, that will basically give you guidance as to how much people charge for certain things. You can also go and check out the Professional Editors group. Indexing. You guys know what indexing is. It's right there at the back, when, especially with academic textbooks, where you have the index at the back of the book, which are keywords, and then with reference to page numbers where you can find it. Now, there are actually professional people, professional indexers, they call themselves, and this is what they do. They specialize in doing this. Sometimes publishing houses would also ask their authors to do the index or compile the index themselves, or sometimes the commissioning editor or someone on the editing team helps out with that as well. So, for example, if the budget does not necessarily allow for that. What's very important is that you stick to this process, because if something goes wrong in one of these steps, say for example you didn't do a good enough edit, and then when you proofread you see all these mistakes, you have to re-edit again. It's going to change page numbering, it's going to change layout. Ultimately it will change your indexing as well. So your index can only be compiled right in the end when you're happy with all the changes made, and you have your master copy of your manuscript that would basically be now prepared for printing. Permissions is the same as like copyright permissions. So you have to make sure that if you use images or photographs or tables or graphs or content, you need to know that you actually got the permission to use it in your book and to resell that. That's why we usually ask for permissions. A lot of academic textbook publishers do this. They then send that specific publisher who is publishing a book, for example, where other research is published in, and you want to use it in your book as well, then you ask for permission to include it in your textbook, and there's usually set fees for that that you need to think about. Then project management, we don't necessarily use it if you're a publishing house yourself, but if it's, for example, a corporate publication, then they sometimes outsource the whole publishing process, and it will then be managed by someone from outside the company. Or maybe it's a project that you want to do as a publishing house, but you get someone else to run that project. Book design, that is when you get books that have very specific look and feel or a design element to it, like cookbooks or art books or coffee table, travel, photographic books. Especially with cookbooks as well, you need a food stylist and a food photographer, setting the scene, taking pictures of the food, and all of these things. So book design is not necessary for all kinds of books. So for example, if you do a novel, you don't necessarily need that aesthetic input, whereas if it's a graphic or photo intensive publication, you'll definitely use a book designer as well. Typesetting and layout, that is when you basically take the file and you convert it into an actual book by setting up style sheets and doing a whole mock-up of the book electronically. Author corrections are usually worked out based on a percentage. We also include this as a cost, because sometimes authors tend to go over the amount of corrections that they're allowed to make. So this is also contractually stipulated, and we'll get to that when we'll do the contract as well. That's why we also work in a certain percentage. I think it's 20% of your typesetting costs that we allocate to author corrections. Artwork, that is anything like illustrations or artwork that you've commissioned to be part of the book. Photos, a lot of, if you need a photographer, or you need to source photos from say for example an historical archive, and you need to get permission, number one, to use it, but also you have to sometimes pay for that. We also get someone who can sometimes do photo research. Once again, if you're doing an historical title, you may have to go into archives and search for a specific photo of a specific time, make sure that there is no copyright on it, or otherwise ask for permission. And then you also need to get the source of it. This is also where scans can come in. Scans may seem very outdated or old-fashioned, but scanning is still a very relevant thing, especially if, say for example, you're commissioning artwork that you're going to include in the book that was painted, or it was done on mixed media, or it was a watercolor illustration for kids' books. Some artists still do it freehand. They don't necessarily do digital drawing always. So then those kind of things need to be, artworks need to be scanned high resolution, so for print quality, and you need a specific scanner and method for that, which is also important to consider if you need a lot of scans to be done. Then obviously you get your proofs from your digital or your lithographic printer. You have to check those things, you pay for that. Your cover design. Now, why would we put that separate from typesetting and book design? Well, the thing there is a lot of companies usually use or outsource the design of their covers to a branding or advertising or a graphic design company, and sometimes they stick with them for quite some time because they like the feel or the design style of that specific company or graphic designer. Very rarely, it happens very rarely that you have an in-house cover designer for all the kinds of books that a publisher are doing, unless it's, say, for example, very template based and the books look very similar to one another. So you design a few cover design templates and you just tweak it here and there. Say, for example, if it's a series of educational books, etc. But usually the cover design can go up to 3,000 Rand, 3 to 5,000 Rand just for the cover design. Right. And then your electronic conversion. Now, this is quite a contentious subject because a lot of people argue whether the producing of an ebook should go on under the same title cost or should it have their own separate costing sheet, because there are different kind of costs involved. Back in the olden days, when ebooks was still something new, they would put it in the production or the origination cost as part of the origination cost of the title. But I mean, these days you get your own ISBN and everything for an ebook, so it would make sense to me that you would have a separate ebook costing sheet as well. But if you want to do electronic conversion to make it into an EPUB, you can always include it in this origination cost as well. And any other once-off costs can also apply here. So basically your origination or your direct costs are those kinds of things, whatever you need to create that raw idea or concept that you had or that you had in your hands that your author brought to you, that you now have to finalize into an actual book format. So, these are the kind of things that you need to look at that are all cost related elements and expenses at the end of the day for your book. On ClickUp, I'll see if I can find the LAMP rates for you guys that you can have a look at, and just have a look at that. Okay, thank you. I hope this helped.